today, the big topic is to talk about how COVID has impacted both the pre-construction and the resale marketplace, some of the impacts and some of the things that we might expect to see coming in regards to the market, how this will impact. If you bought a property and you're in the middle of trying to close on it, or maybe some opportunities that could be available to us. So we will get started in just a second. Okay, Gerry.
Yes.
How are you today, Gerry?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent.
It's been a couple of weeks since we've done this. How are you
It's been a
doing?
couple of weeks, but you know what? I'm getting used to the slower pace of things. You know, in the fall, Gerry, as you know, we were running these clinics
Yeah.
every single week, and it was
Yeah.
go, go, go. But that's the world we were living in, and it's a different world we're living in now. We're forced to slow down, and you kind of get used to it. And you know, I'm kind of enjoying the more relaxed pace of things. I don't know about
Yeah.
you.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's actually, if there's any blessing in disguise in what's going on here it's a new way of doing business, a better way of doing business. I mean, we all miss the human touch and the human element, but that's still there. But certainly, yeah, I agree. There's a slower pace. There's a little more compassion to our fellow man and woman. I think there's a lot of benefits coming out of all this stuff. So I agree. I like it.
Yeah, for sure. And we've had an opportunity now too. I think I feel that even though, you know, we're physically distanced, that people are kind of reconnecting in different ways. You know, whether it's text or Skype or Zoom or whatever, I feel that the people are still managing to, in many cases, let's say, and hopefully people are keeping up both their mental and physical health as well.
Yeah, I mean, prior to all this, I mean, how many people were actually using Zoom and using Skype? Now everybody's using it. I agree. So to connect with everybody, again, we're not eliminating the human interaction, but we can certainly reach out to much more people and keep
Yeah, and I think
better connected.
before you know it, things will be getting back to normal. Hopefully, in the month of May, some of the restrictions are going to be relaxed, and we're going to start getting back to normal. That's what I'm anticipating. What about you, Gerry?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I got a comment. Ernest, virtual for 2.5 years. Good for you, Ernest. Yeah, I mean, probably ahead of the curve a bit, but yeah, I think when we all come out of this, we're going to encompass the virtual world into our business practices, which we're leveraging technology. Those of us in the paper pushing business, now we're really leveraging technology better than we ever have. So.
Gerry,
It's a
can
positive
you
thing.
can you give us an update, Gerry, on some of the relief programs? What's the latest, and also what's the story, please, with respect to tax deadlines? I know that a lot of the deadlines have been moved out, but I'm wondering, like, those deadlines for filing. If you owe money, like, are you going to have to pay interest as if it was due at the regular time, or are they going to
Yeah.
delay the interest on that as well?
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, when all this happened, needless to say, the government reacted. They threw a lot of money at the problem, which I'll just give you a quick update. And then as far as us in the tax business, I'm a CPA, I have a tax practice. We needed help as far as our deadlines. So I'll just quickly touch on the relief programs. I don't want to go too in depth in them. I could literally spend an hour or two going through all this stuff, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to try and do it in a couple of minutes. For those that have questions, I'm glad to ask either on this, on today's webinar or after. So basically, the first program that most of us are familiar with is what's called CURB, which is the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which is the $2,000 a month. That is in its second phase, so it's basically time periods March 15th to April 1 was the first, April 2nd to May 9th, we're into that one. When the government brought this out, it was smooth. You went to the CRA website, click, couple of clicks, and you're done. You get $2,000 in your bank account. So that was very smooth. Then they brought out the $40,000 loan. That was met with, that's been in progress. The problem with that is that a business did require a payroll of 20,000, so that eliminated a lot of people. And then the third one they brought out previously was the wage subsidy, and that was the program was announced a while back, but they actually implemented it last Monday. So it has been a busy week implementing all these wage subsidy. That wasn't quite as simple as they led us to believe. So there was a lot of complication to that. The how that unfolds is it's going to be interesting how that whole thing unfolds. Since we last spoke, there's been a couple of new programs. One was they tried to provide some relief for commercial rent. So when we first heard about the announcement, I got to admit I was I was appalled, because they basically said the tenant only has to pay 25% of their rent. The government will kick in 50%, and the landlord has to eat the other 25%. And before we got more information about that, that was a bit of a shocker. Like, why should a landlord, most landlords have mortgages. So they revised it a bit, that it has to be agreed to by the landlord. There has to be a revision of the contract. So basically the way it is now, in layman terms, if both landlord and tenant agree, and they re-sign, and then they add a clause to their lease that the landlord will accept 75% of the rent. The tenant only has to pay 25% of that, and the government kicks in 50%. That again, that's a combination with the province, so we haven't really seen the final wording of all that. So it sounds good in principle. As it rolls out, I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of what if, but what about that? So we'll see how that unfolds. And then the other one they brought out recently, just in the last week, was for students. So students now get $1,200, and to help them with their finances. Not sure 1,200. 2,000 sounds better with the curb, but there's a provision now for students to access $1,200. They get if there's a disability involved, it's up to $1,750. So we're still trying to find out the clear definition of what a student is, because there's been all kinds of questions on that one. Again, they announce these programs, and we really are left with a lot of questions not being able to be answered because of the details just not being available. But those are the programs that came out. There's a lot of yelling and screaming from businesses that don't have payrolls. They've been forgotten so far. So far, there's been no relief for those type of businesses. We're still waiting and hoping, crossing our fingers, because there's a lot of people that need help running their businesses that don't have employees. All these programs are basically based on if you have employees or not. So we'll see how that unfolds. So yeah, a lot of interesting times. As far as the deadlines, the tax deadlines, they were pretty quick to basically say, don't worry about your April 30th tax deadline. That is now June 1. So we have another month to file the personal tax returns. If you owe tax, don't worry about it till September 1. Okay, so if you owe tax, they're not charging you interest, they're not charging you anything. You owe your money on September 1. So that's a good thing. So all that has happened in the last couple of weeks.
What about self-employed tax deadline?
Yeah, self-employed has always been June 15th. That has not changed. The taxes that they would owe, we still have to file. There's kind of two issues. One is the filing of the tax return. The other is the payment of the tax. So the filing of the tax return is still June 15th for self-employeds, but the self-employeds also have till September 1 to pay their tax. They haven't done anything for corporations as far as deferring. A corporation based on their year end still has 6 months to file after that year end. They owe their tax 3 months after the year end. They haven't done anything for them. HST liability, they've pushed that payment forward to September 1. So, there's a bit of relief. It's good. I mean, it could always be better. But that's a lot that's happened over the last 2 weeks. But what about in your world, David? What's in the mortgage business? What's been happening?
Well,
we're talking about pre-construction today. Like, maybe give us an insight into what you're seeing. I mean, not even pre-construction. Somebody buying a house, and they're going to close it in June, and now all this stuff has happened.
yeah.
Maybe they've lost a job. I don't know what's going on.
Most lenders, they're going to check your until they check your employment, and oftentimes they don't do the verbal employment checks until very close to the closing date. So in most cases, if you've lost your job, you're going to have trouble closing if if you've gotten your mortgage from a bank or any kind of A or B lender. They're going to want to see. Now, if you're self-employed, it's a different story. If you're self-employed and your business has been impacted by COVID-19, that could create some issues for you. I was recently working on a file for an investor, and they said, well, how has the investment portfolio been performing? They want to see, are the rents still coming in every month? If the rents aren't coming in, it's going to be a challenge to use all that income. And we also have people who are running a business and they bought a commercial property for that business. Well, the question comes up, how are they being affected by COVID-19, and how are their clients? So it's definitely going to have some impact. And, as mortgage brokers, we have access to a variety of lenders. So if the borrowers are strong, but they're just having a temporary problem and they can't get the money from the bank, then, there's alternative solutions. We're going to talk to Rosa today about one of the things, Rosa Hushman. I should mention we had some changes to the lineup. Unfortunately, three actually panelists who were supposed to participate either had an emergency or something came up that kept them from being away. But with Doris's help, Doris Perino, who we'll introduce momentarily, Doris is a realtor. Her and Susan Tuglian approached us, Gerry, a couple weeks ago, and said, they had an idea to talk about pre-construction industry and its impacts and COVID-19 impacts on pre-construction. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about the impact on the resale market in general. One further thing I'll add, though, with respect to financing is if you're buying a condo, a pre-construction condo, and you bought it, let's say, 2 years ago, most lenders are going to want to see that you still qualify. There's one bank that offers firm pre-approvals, remarkably, and doesn't check again. So the situation for that particular bank has not changed. They're not going to check your employment again if you were improved with them, with or without COVID-19 happening. But that's the exception. Most lenders do want to check your employment. Now, if you bought a pre-construction condo, you also have the benefit of the fact that probably the price has gone up a lot. So that will help you in terms of getting the financing, right? We actually have one institutional lender who will lend to 100% of the purchase price.
Wow, that's
as long
awesome.
as it doesn't exceed 80% of the current value. Okay,
Jeez.
but yeah.
That's
Right.
going to be helpful for people.
So that can help. And also, if you have lost your job and you can't get your financing, if the equity is there in the property, private lenders will consider that equity. So, even though you may have only put 20% down in terms of deposits, if the price has gone up substantially, you've got equity in the property, and that'll help you to access private money, whether it's for a short or a long term.
So it sounds like most banks or lenders can kind of create their own guidelines. I mean, I'm sure there's federal rules and regulations, but it sounds like that each bank can kind of create their own parameters within lending.
To a degree. I mean, banks are generally quite conservative, and also don't forget, if your mortgage is with less than 20% down, if your purchase is less than 20% down, the mortgage has to be insured. And if it's insured, then the guidelines are pretty well the same across the board. There is more than one insurer, but the guidelines are very, very close from one to the other.
Is it 20% or less than 20 that you need insurance?
If you have less than 20% down, it's got to be insured by CMHC.
So I hate to be opportunistic, but it sounds like the lenders are tightening up all their rules. It sounds like private lending might rise up to be an opportunity for people with money to get involved in private lending.
Well, for sure there are, and there's a lot of private lenders out there. They just love to invest in mortgages because they can see and touch and know exactly what they're investing in. and now is no exception. Of course, there's the uncertainty out there in terms of what will happen with the market. So, what percent loan to value are you comfortable with? And certainly private lenders have scaled back a little bit, but there are still lenders out there who are quite aggressive.
Yeah.
And who are lending. So, but private money is not generally a long-term solution, right? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
to get you over a hump, if
Yeah.
you've lost a job, if you need to close on something,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a way to do it. But in the long term, it'd be tough to carry.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that do private lending, and I mean, it served them well. And I think most of them fall within that 1 year limit max. And I agree, it should never be a long-term solution. Expensive money should never be a solution to a long-term problem. But
Yeah, so I'll just mention that there is people should have a place where they can ask Q&A. You can ask it anywhere you like, but it's easier for us as panelists to be able to see the questions if you put it under a Q&A. Ernest, we're going to get to your question. Thank you. So we do encourage people to ask questions for all the panelists. Ernest, I'll comment on your question shortly. Let's open things up now. I'm going to I want to bring Doris into the conversation and all the other panelists. So let's start with Doris because Doris, you had approached me with Susan Tuglian, the condo queen, and I know you're also very active in pre-construction. You're an experienced real estate agent with about 20 years of experience. You teach courses to other real estate agents. So we appreciate very much you being on this call, and thank you for bringing the idea, and some of the panelists as well. Talk to us about why was it important for you to want to do this webinar, and what are you seeing in the market happening now?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep,
David?
we're good.
First, I want to thank you and Gerry for hosting this. It's amazing. It's a great platform for getting the information out there that maybe a lot of people have questions about, and also to be on top of what's available out there for customers. Like, I didn't even know about this 100% value financing, which is amazing, and you guys are a source of information. So thank you for doing this. The pre-construction market has been really hot these past couple of years, and the appreciation has been incredible. And there's been a lot of people investing in pre-construction. And unfortunately, with this COVID, people were kind of left like, oh my God, what do I do? So Susan and I, we felt like there was some questions that needed to be answered. And we thought we'd get some of the professionals and experts in each category to come out and answer some of these questions and help everybody out. So that was, what was the other question you asked about?
What do you see happening out there? Threats, opportunities?
Well, there are people that are looking to buy, and there's people that are looking to sell, because a lot of people bought more than one unit and they're not going to be able to close on all of them. And it seems like, in that kind of arena, it's kind of like business as usual. If you made a purchase, you have to find a way to close it. Otherwise, you could be on the hook for that. Okay. So there are opportunities where people are willing to let go for a little bit less profit. And there's opportunities that people that have saved their money are looking to buy.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of opportunities? Like, should people wait, or should they jump in now, Doris?
I would probably say jump in now, because from the reports that I've been reading, I mean, there has been an adjustment in the price of the values of the pricing a little bit, but from the reports that I've been hearing, it seems that when things get back to normal, prices are going to be up and demand is going to be there. But I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know for sure. But if you bought a lot of properties and you need to liquidate, it's better to not be greedy, let go, make some money, and don't be, put so much stress on yourself on figuring out how are these properties going to close, because you will be required to close.
If I can jump in, Doris, I appreciate that comment about you think the prices really may not have that much of effect. Because I hear a lot about the number of units going down, but I haven't heard as much about the actual value of the house. Like I myself, I have two fix and flip projects on the go right now, and we're going to be selling them in the next two months. So obviously there's concern as far as my investors, but I haven't heard too much that the values, I mean, the number of units of sales have gone down, but it sounds like you're reinforcing what I think, that the value of these properties, I mean, they might drop a little bit, but not a significant drop in these values.
Right. Well, post COVID, they were going up, and there was multiple offers.
Yeah.
After COVID, the first week, was everybody was kind of like stunned. Then
Yep.
after that, people started getting in motion,
Yeah.
and but still the prices have gone down a little bit, but there are still multiple offers going on.
That's what I've heard. I've heard there's still places getting multiple offers, which is awesome. I mean,
and the inventory's picking up now.
Okay, interesting.
Okay,
And
so
there are people that want to sell,
Yeah.
and they said, oh, let's wait till the COVID. I don't want people in my house and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the risk is that right now the inventory is low. So if you want to sell for top dollar, right now is the time to do it, because once everything kind of goes back to the new normal, there's going to be a lot of influx of inventory out there, and
right.
you might
Yeah,
not get as much.
that would be a concern, I guess, when the market seems to be back. The inventory will be high, probably, I would think.
Yeah.
okay,
A lot of people are holding off, so I have a lot of off-market properties available right now.
Right. Interesting.
Okay, so Doris, I know you've also written a book, How to Sell Your Home for More Money, and you have some tips for people, especially in the COVID era. But let's come back to that a little bit later. I would like to move on now to, since we're talking about values and number of properties on the market, I think this would be a good time to go over to bring in Gord Somerville. Gord Somerville is from HVI Appraisals. Very highly qualified person. And also I know from my experience, because I do a lot of alternative lending with alternative lenders and private lenders, that HVI Appraisals is one of the go-to companies if you want a conservative appraisal. Very well-respected company. So Gord, can you please tell us, what are you seeing happening out there with respect to values? Are you seeing any changes? And how are you doing appraisals now, by the way? I mean, are you able to even access these properties? Is that encouraged or discouraged?
Thanks a lot, Gerry. If I could be so bold, though, just to say I'd rather replace the word conservative with realistic from your earlier statement. Home Value Inc. Stands for, or HVI stands for Home Value Inc. So to answer your question, let's take how we're appraising properties first. We're doing it virtually in most cases. Obviously, depending on whether it's a refinance or a purchase, presents challenges for us to arrange with someone to actually be on the other end of the recording of a virtual inspection of the property. But we navigate through that as best we can. Everybody is understanding the world has changed, and everybody needs to be a little more cooperative with each other. So the appraiser still goes to the property. Our lenders want us, they respect our curbside opinion of property. So we go to the property and we inspect it on the outside, and we do our measurement and take our exterior pictures. And then we are reliant on getting a virtual inspection of the interior, where typically we have two people on our end and one person at the other end, where one is a technical person on my end, and then the other is the appraiser, and the appraiser directs that person through the house, replicating exactly how they would move through the house doing their inspection. We end up with a recording, which we snap our pictures from, and then complete our report. The end report really appears very similar to how it used to. Some would present to us we should discount our fee because we're getting the support of somebody else to help us do that inspection. But candidly, my appraisers say we should charge more because it's quite a bit more tedious to make the arrangements. So it's a wash. We're not charging more. Timing, the turnaround time is probably a little longer. I'll see if my results for the end of April will be available to me by about Wednesday or Thursday this week, and we track our performance. We typically complete our assignment 2 days or less after we've inspected the property, and we'll see if we've carried on, at that standard. It should be about the same. To answer your question, how are we valuing property? Doris and yourself have spoken about the volumes being down, and it was interesting to me. This is the first time I've seen in a market where both sales and listings dropped at almost identical timing. So the net result is a very high percentage of people have stepped off and taken a bench seat, and they're not actively pursuing things right now, whether it's to list their property or to sell it. Of course, I'm only speaking of resales, not new construction. The net result has been very little activity in the sales area, and we are finding that we are not making an adjustment generally to our appraised value, even though we may be relying on sales that occurred in March or February, unless there is listing activity that would make it prudent that we do make a downward adjustment. The best example I could give you is if I'm in a semi-detached house and I'm appraising it, whether it's for, let's say I'm appraising it for refinancing, a renewal of their mortgage, I'm going to look at the most recent sales of semi-detached in the neighborhood and be mindful of them. As well, I'm going to be looking very clearly at any listings of semi-detached and any price changes. And I have to be mindful of that because that is the current market. And it is expected that we will see, if this goes on longer than we anticipate, we will see the listings probably rise relative to the demand because people will be in a position that they have to list.
So that could result in prices to drop, right? Obviously, excessive supply, not enough demand.
Correct.
Gord, can I ask, how long are these appraisals good for now? Have the lenders reduced? Like,
Yeah, very good
given
question.
an appraisal 45 days old, are they accepting that, or are they sending you back?
Lenders have kind of reacted in two ways, David, and you nailed one. They used to look at an appraisal as 90 days it was valid for. I mean, the majority of them, they all had their own game plan, but the majority were 90 days. Now it's 30 days.
30 days, wow.
Yes, so, that just points out and demonstrates that we're all kind of waiting to see where this market will go. The second thing they've done is many of them have lowered their loan to value that they will lend on. And in that same fashion, an appraisal has an intended use statement in it, which is kind of like a warranty. And we've lowered our intended use to be 75% loan to value as opposed to 80, which would be our standard prior to this. And we've done that. It's not changing the environment by us doing it because on canvassing my lenders, they all have reduced their loan to value.
Boy, David, that must, for firming up a deal, 30-day appraisals, that must really be hard for some purchasers if they're waiting, if they need an appraisal within 30 days before getting a commitment confirmed.
Well, that's a good point, Gerry. So most of the mortgages I've been working on lately are refinances, but it does pose a very good question because usually when people buy a property, they're not closing within 90 days or within 30 days. So if they're concerned about the value and they want to do an appraisal up front, or at the time of getting the financing, then they may be in position where they have to get a second appraisal if the closing date is 2 or 3 months later.
that's concerning. Anyway, I guess it's the new reality.
Yeah, but most importantly, you're going to need, yeah, okay, so you could be in a situation where you require two appraisals, I suppose,
Right.
if you're concerned about the current value. I would like to bring in Rosa Hushman. Thank you very much for joining us, Rosa. You recently wrote this really great article where you talked a lot about some of the legal impacts of COVID-19. One of them, which I want to touch on to start, has to do with getting out of a contract if you cannot close. There's different buzzwords people are throwing around: frustrated contracts, force majeure. I mean, do any of these come into effects? And what if you are a buyer who can't close or doesn't want to close?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good questions. There are, as you said, there are some questions regarding closing and frustrated contracts. However, when it comes to real estate, we have a case law from 2018 that says the first measure does not apply to real estate dealings because basically it's not unforeseeable to see the market value will change. Now, whether this pandemic will come into play as an unforeseeable situation is not known. We don't know yet because we haven't had any precedent. We have to wait basically for the pandemic to be over with and cases go to court for new law to be made. That's the short and sweet answer.
Rosa, for the benefit of our audience, can you maybe explain this force majeure concept?
Sure. Give me a moment, because I wrote this very nicely in a very plain language. So force majeure is when two parties agree to an agreement or a contract, and there are obligations that both have to fulfill. Now, sometimes there are certain circumstances that is beyond the control of any party, and that affects the contract, and it makes the contract basically impossible to be fulfilled by the parties. What we call act of God, or something that you really do not anticipate, and it's outside of the parties' control. Now, in 2018, there was a court decision that the force majeure was argued by the counsel of the plaintiff as to why they couldn't, and it had to do with the market value at property that the same situation that we're in right now. The market value had dropped very significantly between the time that they signed and between the closing date. It's Forest Hill Homes versus OU. If anyone's interested, can message me or email me, and I'll send you the links to a lot of these case laws that are basically right now out there. Now, the court in that case decided that changing on a market value, a frustration would require an unforeseeable event that would render the contractual obligation impossible to fulfill. Being something more than a market change, that's what the court decided. So it was not, it is not something that prior to this pandemic could have been argued in court. But as I said, that might very well change because it is the first time in our legal system within the past 150 years that we have such a situation coming up.
So purchasers might still be able to cling to that clause, the force majeure clause, if in case of a real, in case they're trying to get out of an agreement.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's just not proven. It's just not proven in court yet.
There is no precedent right now. So because we didn't have such a case before the court, with this circumstances. So we don't really know where the law stands on it. It all would depend on the circumstances of every case, and basically the judge that's sitting and deciding. So the law hasn't been decided.
Gotcha. Well, I think we're anxious to see what happens, because I'm sure there will be purchasers who try to use that clause. Because, is this an act of God? I don't know. Maybe an act of China. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know.
So prior to this pandemic happening, if I may just for a moment, as I said, there were lawyers that brought, or legal representatives that brought this argument before the court, but the court decided that there's always this risk of change in the market value. It's always foreseen in real estate transactions, but it was never due to a COVID-19 pandemic or anything like this, that everybody was closed, and more than one or two major part of the contract was really affected, such as financing it, the value dropping, the value of the homes dropping drastically. So yeah, we have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I could see that would be a pretty easy decision for the court, not, to not allow the home to close just based on fair market value. I mean, I can't see that being a justifiable cause, but what we're all going through now, there's probably a lot of merit in being able to overturn a contract based on what's going on. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Well, if you can't get your financing and can't close the deal, then you might be able to bring that into play, I suppose. Otherwise, you could be if prices do drop, the seller could hold you responsible for the decline in sale price.
It's going to be curious because, it's one thing to have the, something happen to the purchaser, i.e. lose a job or something. But if nothing really changes with the purchaser, and it's the lending industry that's changing everything, I mean, it's out of the control of the purchaser. So there's going to be some very interesting cases coming up in this regard. We'll have to wait and see.
Most definitely.
We've got some questions. I'm not sure who's the best to tackle them. I'll just mention we've got one here from Terry Wallman. How do you get pre-build builders to agree to assignment of sale agreements from original buyer to assignee? Doris, is that something you want to comment on, possibly?
Yes, I was on another Zoom call the other day, and you were there too. And there we did have some builders in there. So it seems because of COVID, they have some builders, and you got to check with each builder. They have made some adjustments on the deposits, on different little things. So you have to talk to each individual builder and find out. Am I answering the question right?
But isn't if there's an assignment clause, I mean, that's in the contract. Aren't you allowed to assign if it's in the contract? I can't see where COVID comes in and goes, oh, now we're not going to let you assign. Or, I mean, a contract is a contract.
I think that most builders and developers, they're being pretty open, they're trying to do whatever they can to help the buyers because they don't want to get stuck.
Right, of course, yeah.
But a lot of builders, a lot of them put this clause that you can't even assign it before.
Oh, but that would have been known from day one.
Right, but if there is the assignment clause in there, they have the right to assign it.
Right, of course, yeah. So I can't see where COVID really changes that, whether they're allowed to assign or not. That would have been in the original contract, unless I'm missing something. But.
Okay, there's a question from Joel, just going down the list, and I'm not honestly not sure what he means here. What are the chances that lenders will extend the payment waivers beyond the initial 6 months? And he said he missed a word. More lenders will extend. Oh, I see. Oh, okay, right. Yeah, because they've announced that you could defer your mortgage payments for up to 6 months. What are the chances that they're going to do that? Well, that's a good question, Joel. Personally, I think it's not terribly likely. In my opinion, I think that people are going to start getting back to work before too long. And it's really going to depend on that. It's going to depend on the economy and people's ability to pay. But it is a very good question, because if it's a slow start and, there's a lot of people end up being unemployed and unable to make their mortgage payments. I mean, it seems like the government is doing a pretty good job to make this the least rough ride possible for the economy. And if you look back at what happened in the Great Depression era, it seems that the government didn't do very much. Now they're printing money, and they're giving money. So, I mean, the short term, it relieves pain. What will be the long-term effects on that? Well, presumably they'll be shared by everybody, and hopefully they'll be mitigated. But I think it's a good idea now to, at least, on top of not being able to pay your mortgage, that you shouldn't go hungry. So I think the government is doing a fairly good job, and the banks have gone along with that. And the banks have money, so I think they can afford to defer it. Whether they agree to defer more than another 6 months, I think will really depend on what happens over the next 3 months, how quickly people get back to work, and as we find out what kind of a toll this has taken on our economy.
I'd like to jump in here too. Thanks for the question, Joel. Good question. Yeah, I mean, the banks, I mean, I don't mean to be critical here, but whatever the banks are going to do to help anybody, it's going to make them money. And I hate to say it like that, but when the government announced a 6-month deferral, I mean, it all sounded great. Oh, wow, isn't that nice, banks? Well, they're charging fees, they're accumulating interest. The amount of interest that these deferred payments are going to add up to over the life of the mortgage is astronomical. So, with all due respect to the banks, it's nice that they provide these deferrals, but it's a moneymaker for them. And it's a little pet peeve of mine that the government, they're creating these programs, they're printing all this money. I mean, this week I heard that our deficit for this year alone is $250 billion, which is just insane. But they haven't gone to the banks and said, hey, you got to forego a mortgage payment. I'm not saying that's the easy way out, but the banks haven't really, this hasn't cost the banks any money, and the banks make a fortune. So, as I mentioned before, they went to the commercial rents, they went to the poor landlord and say, you got to eat 25% if you want us to help you confirm 75% of your rent. They haven't gone to the banking industry and said, yes, you can defer your payments, but the bank isn't out any money. So it's a bit of a pet peeve with me. I think to really answer that, I don't think anybody has the answer what the banks will do after 6 months deferrals. I think the key thing is to communicate with your bank. I think every lender can kind of create their own guidelines and rules. So the key is, don't let it get to 6 months and then phone the bank. I mean, if you're in that predicament, start communicating with them. That would be my suggestion.
There's a question here from one of our audience members. A lot of good questions. So again, I encourage the panel to take a look through the questions and answers if you see them on your screen. I'll read out one here. This is for either Gord and or Doris, I think. And that is, as you were saying that the value of properties will probably drop, I think that's what Gord was saying. When do you think this will happen? And do you think that the value of the condo market will be down in September? I was thinking of selling my condo in the fall.
Well, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I had expected to see prices decline fairly quickly, which they did not, because supply, number of listings dropped as quickly as did the demand. However, looking at condos, we have seen a tremendous appreciation in condo properties over the past 3 years. It blew right by 2017 and just kept going. That being said, I can't help but believe there are going to be a lot of condos where they're not collecting rent. There are a lot of condos that were being used for Airbnb. And there were a lot of condos that, the person was working with a very, very leveraged, if they owned more than one. It's my anticipation that we are going to see that market first start to add listings. And when there's listings, it's a gross example, but I'll say it can start to look like rats jumping off a sinking ship. Whoever, jumps first motivates the others to jump as far as lowering their price. So I think we're going to see, a return to prices in the condo market that we, maybe saw 6 months ago, a year ago. Is that a terrible thing? I mean, obviously, if you're losing money, it is. But if you bought 3 years ago or 4 years ago, you're still probably in a capital gain because it has appreciated so much. That would be my, prediction that we're going to see condos drop first because they tend to be, they've got 3 components that I look at, and 2 of them are not favorable going forward. One is many of them are rented, and 2 is many of them are being used for Airbnb, and I guess the third point is immigration. Many have been bought by people who are foreign investors. And those things are not looking favorable for quite some time. The positive thing for condos is they're the entry point. They are, the lowest cost product that if you want to get into real estate ownership, they're usually the first step in. So I think the weight is going to pull the prices down. It's going to pull the supply up and pull the prices down. But it was inevitable to some degree because they've appreciated so rapidly over the past 3 years.
Yeah, I think a lot too will depend on how we come out of this pandemic. I mean, if it just goes away, then everybody gets back to normal and prices probably will get back to, based on the fundamentals. I mean, if it's a long process, if there's a second wave of this pandemic, a third wave, I could just see us sitting in some kind of limbo or holding pattern while we all try to figure out what's going on with the market. So,
Doris, do you want to comment on that? This person who asked about, he was thinking about selling his condo in the fall.
Right. I'm a great believer that when you need to do something like you want to sell, you want to cash out, there's no time like the present because you don't know what the future is going to hold, what's going to happen in the future. So if you have a price in mind that makes sense, I would say start marketing it right away because we don't know what's going to happen. I can tell you right now what is happening in the condo market is that a lot of Airbnbs cannot be operating as Airbnb, and the people that are investing in Airbnbs are depending on that Airbnb income. So there's a big influx of condos on the market for long-term rentals. So what I see now is that those rentals are not renting as fast as they used to. And to top it all off, the prices have to be reduced $200 to $300 a month to even get some activity. And then there's also the issue that it's not easy to go in and view because if it's tenanted, the tenants don't want people coming in. And also sometimes the buildings are having rules and regulations now that they don't want agents going in. So people are having to rent and buy kind of sight unseen. So it's not, it's not an easy task. And prices have been going down in the condos because of the influx, I would say because of the Airbnb and investors wanting to cash out, take their money and figure out what's going to happen later.
Doris, what do you, if I asked what the average price per square foot is for condos now, what would your answer be?
For purchasing?
Yeah, just value, just value.
Oh, the values? I would say they probably went down about, I would say like 10% down.
No, sorry, the price per square foot.
So it depends, price per square foot. Yeah, there's different prices depending on what part of the city that you're in. Yeah. But I would say right now, the average is probably around $900 a square foot.
Awesome. It's good.
Another question from Terry, Doris. If I understand the question, do builders accept VTB financing to facilitate closings? I think he means, are they offering VTB financing? Do you know about that?
I think it really depends on the builder. It really depends on the builder. I think some small builders might be more open to it than some bigger builders. Each builder is trying to find out, different things they can do to help the buyers because they don't want to get stuck themselves either, and they don't want to put themselves in risk. So it really depends. I haven't really heard of that happening on a wide scale yet.
Okay, very good.
Mhm.
There was I'll just quickly review who we have on the panel because there was a question. I said I didn't catch the presenter's name. So just a quick refresh. So we have Gort Somerville from HVI Appraisers. We have Rosa Hushman from HushmanParalegal.com. We have Doris Perino, sales representative, real estate sales representative. And of course, my partner, Gerry Hogenhout, who's a CPA and also runs an investment company, Canadian Investment Services. And then I'm David Grossman, mortgage broker.
Can I ask Rosa a question?
Sure.
Rosa, and it's just asking in regards to residential rents and tenants. I myself am a landlord, and knock on wood, so far they've all paid. When this pandemic first came out, the message was distorted in a way. Don't worry, tenants, the landlord can't kick you out. Whatever that really means legally, I'm not sure. What is your advice to the many landlords out there? So you have a tenant, they have an issue, you're trying to work with them. You're not trying to be the mean landlord. You're trying to work with them. But do you suggest we file N4s right away? Maybe take us through the process. What happens? There's a lot of landlords out here. So what happens? May 1 comes and we don't get the rent. Maybe explain what we should do from your opinion.
Sure. Before I answer your question, I believe the question of they didn't get the intro was for me, David. So I am, as David said, my legal name is Parisa Hushman. I go by Rosa Hushman. I wrote an article regarding COVID-19 and the issues it has on real estate issues and all contract issues. And you can find that at hushman.legal. I am a paralegal, not a lawyer. I like to put that out there and make sure everybody understands it. To answer your question, Gerry, I get a lot of landlords that are coming. Actually, I get like 4 or 5 calls a day regarding that same issue. Bottom line is your tenant has to pay you the rent. And I get calls from tenants as well. So you don't live in someone's house for free. At the moment, there are, as you mentioned, emergency funding that's coming in, the $2,000 and other ways of help that's coming in from the government. Now, when your tenant doesn't pay you come May 1st, you have every right to file the N4, to serve the N4. But you have to understand as a landlord that you cannot file any application with the board right now if it's not an emergency application. You cannot file the application. The board won't take the application. So I would suggest that you go ahead and do the N4 because the minimum is 14 days, right, for the N4 from the time of serving the N4 to the time of doing the application. Because at the end of the day, you have a mortgage to pay. It may be deferred, but you have to pay it still. And your tenants cannot live in your house rent-free. However, Landlord-Tenant Board came up with, I have that also as an attachment to an article that I have on hushman.legal. Landlord-Tenant Board came with encouraging the landlord and the tenants to come up with an agreement and start paying the rent. So if your tenant is under the impression that they can go on rent strike or they don't have to pay the rent because of the pandemic, they're very, very, very wrong. They have to pay the rent. And I encourage the landlords to go ahead and work things out with their tenants, coming to some sort of agreement of a payment plan. And I have one or two actually drawn up. If anyone likes, I can just send me an email and I will send it to you. To the process of talking to your tenants and what to ask them for. Basically, they need to pay you, take the money however little it is, and go ahead and do your N4.
So if I get a tenant, so tenant's behind, just hypothetical so far, again, in my world, it's all good. But so if a tenant doesn't pay, I get the N4 served on them, but I can't do anything. The court system is shut down. So does that N4 just become valid, invalid? So is there any point in me doing that? Like, and I'm just, again, I'm speaking in general, because a lot of the landlords, you know, they probably have never filed an N4. You know, they've dealt with tenants. Maybe the rent isn't due on the first day, but it's always, oh, I'll have it by Friday. So a lot of us landlords, if we have to go file an N4, it's probably the first time we've done it, and we're very unfamiliar with the process. So does that expire if I don't submit it to the court in 14 days?
That's a very good question. So let me go back and explain. N4 is the notice that you serve on the tenant. And when you research, you see that there are ways of serving it on the tenant that is acceptable by the board. Your N4 has certain information, and all the information on your N4 has to be correct. I'm getting into a little bit more details. You have no idea how many applications you filed with the board, and the landlord is at right. They haven't had their money for the rent for the past 5-6 months, because it takes the board actually 4 months to give you a hearing date.
Yeah.
And everything goes out the window just because one mistake was done on N4. So
Right.
if you haven't done an N4 before, please contact a paralegal or a lawyer. A lot of paralegal in your areas, including myself, we give half an hour, 15 minutes, or free consultation time. So if you do the N4, you serve it on your tenant, you have to wait the minimum of 14 days before you're allowed to file an application.
Right.
Okay. To answer your question, I don't believe that N4 has an expiry date, and I say that I let you guys talk, and I will pull up my resources and give a definite answer to that. But I don't believe that it has an expiry date, because it says at the minimum days you have to wait is 14 days to see if the tenant pays you rent.
Okay, cool, good.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just looking at some other questions. Gord, there's a question here for you. I know it's probably repeating it, but it's probably worth repeating, which is, let's see, the process of appraisals. Can you just quickly, maybe again, go through how you're doing these appraisals, just quickly?
Just to tack on, there was a question about what's the cost of an appraisal as well, while Gord is commenting.
Just real quick, how you're doing it today compared to how you're doing it previously, because I know you'd kind of touched on, but someone missed it and they'd like you to re-explain it, and I think that might be a benefit to all of us again.
Oh, hold on, he's muted. Okay, sorry, Gord, you were muted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, what we found out, when the health orders came down for physical distancing, most of our lenders, the majority of our lenders said they really wanted us to see the property from the outside, from curbside. They really wanted us to see the property on the inside. Again, I deal with mostly B lenders, people that are, very focused on the equity of the property, as opposed to as focused on the covenant of the borrower. That being said, we still go to the property. If it's a condo apartment, we literally go to the front of the condo building, but we do not go into the elevator and up to the floor. However, if it's a freestyle, freehold home, we're going to the curbside. We are pre-arranging that with the homeowner. Because we're walking on their property, we're going to see the property from behind. We're going to measure their property. Again, we're going to stay outside. But we are then arranging for ideally a Zoom virtual inspection with the occupant of the house. And if they don't have the technology savvy to do that, we are accepting photos and a informed party home inspection report to be completed and signed by them. It's a form that we created under the circumstances, which asks the person for information so that we can understand the interior of the property. We also check all the information we get from our sources online, whether it be from MPAC, previous MLS listings, anything. We have a responsibility to be thorough and not just accept what we're given, but to be diligent in checking it. The appraisal process takes a little bit longer because we need that cooperation. The fee that we charge for the appraisal is unchanged from what we were charging before. Ours is a very thorough report, and gentleman that's had a few questions, Terry Wallman, is a good client. David, you're a good client. Our report is very thorough, very, I believe, very forward-thinking. We do a lot of statistics looking at the market as it exists now, and what is the current supply and what is the current demand. And that being said, our average fee is typically it was about $500 per appraisal, with the lowest fee being $435 plus HST. And fee ranges depending upon the value of the property and the size of the property and the circumstances of the property. How generic is the property or how unique is the property? So
if I could just a hypothetical scenario. So let's say I'm a purchaser. I rely on your appraisal, and it's a virtual appraisal, and everything is good so far. I assume I would have the right to go into the house, obviously, to confirm my, because prior to that, I wouldn't be able to get into the house, let's say. So I'm a hypothetical purchaser. I'm relying on your appraisal. I'm relying on the pictures or the Zoom video, but I've never been in the house yet.
Well,
So maybe that's a question for David, or anybody. Like, how do I? Obviously, I have to get into the house to buy it.
Our report is relied on by the lender primarily for a purchase. Right. No disrespect meant to the purchaser at all, but our primary focus is providing the lender the due diligence they want prior to lending the money.
Right. Maybe Doris, is that a question for you? So I'm a purchaser. Everything is good. I'm relying on the appraisals, the virtual appraisals, but I got to get in the house to make sure I want to buy it. How does that work?
Well, you just put in the offer that your offer is conditional upon actual having a viewing.
Right.
Which a lot of agents right now, because of this COVID, is something that they're doing. It's a protocol typically, and people are open to doing that, is giving offers conditional on viewing. So they have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
So then, as a real estate agent, are you taking me through the house, I guess, obviously, before I make my final decision?
Oh yeah, once the offer is in place and it's conditional, everything else is in line. Yes, and it would be done with COVID-19 protocols that we have to bring the gloves, the masks, the wipes, and all that.
If I can interject too, I think the circumstances of that would come up most often where you're buying a property now with a closing to be in the future, and everybody is of the wish that in the future the requirements of physical distancing will be less, and therefore closer to the close date you'll have that opportunity. Is that a fair comment, Doris?
Well, no, the opportunity would be right after the offer is accepted to view the house. That's when people want to view it, right? Once the offer is accepted and you have a serious buyer, and then at that point, then it would be conditional on viewing, but it would happen very quickly after the offer has been accepted, not at the last minute, not before the close.
But that is why there are so few sales now, because
people are also like gun shy. They're afraid. They think maybe prices might go down further, but they're taking a risk because they might even go up. Like, nobody knows right now. We don't have a crystal ball. We never.
So if I'm buying a house and it's closing in 2 months, and I've relied on the virtual appraisal, and I've got into the house with my real estate agent. Everything is okay, and it's all good. It's going to close in 2 months. Now, is that lender going to go back and say, Gord's appraisal is more than 30 days. I need a new one. Is
Yes.
that the new reality?
Correct.
Jeez. Okay.
There's a couple of 2-in-1 questions on the same sort of idea for Doris. If I list my condo now, can I even find a realtor to come by to appraise my condo? How do you assess the interior of the condo to do your assessment, Doris? And also the second part is, did you say that the average value of condos have gone down by 10% since COVID?
Yes, more or less, but it depends. The condo depends the location, the building. It depends where it's located. But also rents have gone down. If you want to rent your condo right now, don't expect to get the same rent you were getting, before COVID. As far as what was the first question was, how do we do it? So right now everything is done pretty much virtual. The good thing is about condos is that more or less, once you know the model number, the maintenance fees, it's not hard to come up with a valuation of the property, more or less. And then unless you've done like extreme, like different upgrades or it's, spectacular, then there could be adjustments. But more or less right now, there's a range for the values of condos unless there's something different. And right now, like viewing is not entirely necessary because we asked the seller to just give us like a tour with a camera so we can see more or less, anything that's particular, anything that's different from the average condo that's selling in there. And so right now, first step is done virtually, unless there's a real big request to see it done, in person, then, it could be done that way as well with the protocols in place. But right now, people are avoiding that live contact as much as possible. But if it has to be done, it could be done.
Cool.
Okay, so we were, sorry, Rosa was researching something. I don't know if, Rosa, do you have the answer? I think there was also a question, I'm assuming this is for Rosa, said, can you file the application online? I don't know if Ernest is talking about the eviction notice or if he's talking about a mortgage application. So maybe you can elaborate.
I would think it would be the N4. That'd be my guess. But
that's what I think he was talking about.
Ernest, you got to be more specific.
Okay, hold on.
Let's
Rosa.
assume it's the N4. Anyway.
Rosa's on mute. We got to unmute Rosa. Rosa, I can't unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
There you go.
There we are. Unmute.
Rosa, the N4 can they be filed online?
The N4 is not filed. Let me answer your first question first. The N4 does not expire. The N4 doesn't get filed online before the application. The N4 is a notice that you hand to your tenant, and there are specific ways to serve it. You can hand it in person, you can do it by mail, and then there are specific days that you have to follow. You have to wait at least 14 days, and if you're doing it by mail, you have to count the days for the mail to get to the tenant before you can do an application. When you do an application online, then your landlord application, the board requests to see your N4.
Gotcha.
As well. Applications are not being accepted online right now, unless they are emergency applications.
Right.
Okay, so we are, unfortunately, LTB has a big wait line. It's before pandemic, if I did an L2 application, which goes after the N4 notice, I would have to wait 3 to 4 months to get a hearing date, and God knows how long it's going to take after this whole crisis calms down. So if you're a landlord and you can manage to get some money out of your tenants, please go ahead and do so.
So the tenants could see this as an opportunity. It could take a year.
Unfortunately, yes. Once your tenant, if you have a judgment-proof tenant, and once your tenant decides to, I'm going to live in this house, don't pay the rent, $2,000, $2,500 a month for the next 5, 6, 7 months, and then I'll just get up and leave. There are processes that you can go to the board. You can get the order for the tenant that has to pay you, enforce that order in small claims court. But if your tenant doesn't have money, do you think you'll see the money? So.
Okay.
Sounds like the laws just got further swayed against the landlord.
Yeah.
Truly.
Rosa, Rosa, that was good. I'm going to encourage all the panelists to do this. Rosa put in her contact information and her phone numbers. So I'm going to encourage all the panelists to put their contact information there, company name, whatever they want to share in case they would like to be contacted. I would like to comment on 1 or 2 questions that relate to mortgages. There was an interesting question here. It was, wouldn't it be to the advantage of the lenders to add this interest to the mortgage balances? This was in the context of the deferrals that we were speaking about earlier, as they are writing new business without legals, appraisals, etc. Okay, so that's a very interesting question. Yeah, right. I mean, but I think that the amount of additional interest that they're going to earn from a few months worth of mortgage deferrals is not going to be significant, especially not in comparison to the administrative cost to deal with all of the calls and inquiries that are coming in, having to deal with working from home and bringing their technology into their homes, answering all these requests, and to be able to account properly for these changes in mortgage statements and so on. I really doubt that they're going to come out further ahead. Overall, what I see happening with respect to the banks and mortgage rates and so on is they're worried that they're going to be writing less business overall, because when the economy is down, people are not borrowing money. So as a result, even though, for example, if you look at variable rate mortgages, even though the Bank of Canada has dropped the rate in March, they dropped it 3 times, half a point, and then another half a point. And the overnight rate is down to a 1/4 point right now. Prime rate is around 2.5%, but 2-3 months ago, they were offering a big discount off the prime rate. You could get well below prime. Now the rates are so whatever the Bank of Canada has done to try and reduce costs, the banks have at least to some degree kind of swallowed up that margin because they're concerned about the profitability. And while I'm sure that most people don't have a lot of sympathy for the banks, I think it's worth reminding you that most people, if they have mutual funds, that the bank stocks do make up a fair share of those mutual funds in many cases. So they're going to want the banks to not be giving away money and start acting as though they're a charity.
I jump in on that comment. That was a
Sure.
good comment, because when you say the banks, so I don't know if people realize when the government borrows all or creates all this money, they're not literally printing $100 bills. What they're doing is they're creating government bonds and T-bills. They get auctioned off through the Bank of Canada. The purchases of those bonds are either banks themselves or investment institutions. I mean, that's where I think $1 trillion of debt now in Canada. Most of that stuff is sitting in pension plans all over the world. But when the government creates these bonds and it goes to the banks can actually create the same amount of money. It's called fiat money, F-I-A-T. So with all this creation of money that the government is doing, again, this past year, $250 billion deficit, the banks then, as a result, have the ability to create their own money, tons of it, tons and tons and tons of money. So they're going to be in strong lending positions. And that's why my earlier comment was, the banks have done, the government has done the banks a big favor by creating all this money, because as a byproduct, the banks can now create a ton of their own money. Obviously, they're going to lend it out at a margin and make money on it. So the expectation of banks to become even more profitable because of all this is a high expectation. Once again, if I don't know if Justin Trudeau's on our call, David, but if he is, you got to go after the banks, get them involved in some of these savings that we all need.
Okay, well, I'm not sure that Justin Trudeau is on this call.
He should be.
He definitely should be. Yeah. Gord, there was a question about, does your company do commercial appraisals as well?
Yeah, I just started with a gentleman who has his AACI designation. So my answer prior to May 1st was no. We do only residential, but my answer after May 1st, and we're now May 2nd, I believe, May 3rd, sorry, is we will be dabbling in some commercial appraisals. It depends on the appetite of my new member.
That's an interesting lead into, commercial properties. Wow. I mean, they're going to get beat up a lot. I mean, these tenants, how many of these tenants are coming back? The supply and demand of commercial property is really going to favor the person interested in buying or leasing a commercial property.
Agreed.
Interesting times ahead. So there could be a lot of opportunities out there in commercial properties as far as taking over existing businesses. I mean, there's bar owners that are literally just closing the doors and leaving and not coming back. So if someone's interested in a bar, turnkey operation and probably at a discounted rent with the landlord. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, commercial's going to be hit hard. Question by Ernest. This was much earlier. He said, what's happening with equity lenders? What rates are these private mortgages? Major windfall, he says. Well, I mean, listen, I haven't seen a massive change to pricing in terms of private mortgages. What I have seen is that private lenders are somewhat nervous. I've seen some private lenders decided just to stop lending for some period of time. There was a lender that I dealt with frequently, and they announced that they're back in business as of a couple of days ago. But depending on if you're in the first mortgage business or the second mortgage business, your exposure could be great. If you're at a high loan to value on a second mortgage, it's not going to take a lot for you to be in a situation where you could be at risk, because you always have to consider, as a private mortgage lender, what happens if you have to take action. And you have selling costs, and you have months that could pass. And especially now with the first mortgage, if you're in second position and the bank has a first mortgage and they're deferring payments for 6 months, your equity is eroding. So rates on first mortgages, private money starts at as low as 5 or 6%. There's almost always fees, and that assumes a very low loan to value. I saw one lender advertise that they were doing very low rates if the loan to value is below 50%. So if your loan to values are good and low, by that I mean, let's say in the 50% range or even up to 60% range, the risk is not considered to be great. But if it gets higher than that, there's a number of other factors involved in assessing the risk, including the strength of the buyers, the location of the property, the type of property, what's the money being used for, and so on.
So I see a question that probably is directed for Rosa, but I'm going to try and answer it. Maybe Rosa, you can tell me if I'm giving the right information or not. So somebody's asking, so instead of, if we're trying to, if we have an issue with a tenant, we go through the normal landlord-tenant board process, and let's say we're unsuccessful, can we go through a collection agency after that? So I know you can, but I guess my answer would be I don't think you'd be very successful. And any comments on that, Rosie?
That would be my answer as well. When you go through the process of the LTB, you get an order in your hand, which is in the province of, actually it is forcible for 21 years.
20 years from
21 years. Every 6 years you have to register that,
okay.
which has another process, but it can to some extent just it can go to other provinces of Canada as well. I don't want to get into that. That's a whole new meeting. But I would not. I would honestly, that's a question for a collection agency. But I would not recommend it.
No, and I agree. I mean, I've seen many people, try to go through the collection agency route, and very few have been successful through that. So I don't know if it's too strong a statement, but I really don't think it's worth your time or effort. But anyway, I'll leave that.
What happens at the end is when the collection agency cannot collect, they will hire one of us and we'll start a process that you should have started many months ago without losing any money.
Right. And then they phone you every day at supper time.
Yes.
So I've heard. I don't know.
That they do.
Just what I've heard. I don't know.
Just to add to that, there was another, just to go, we do have time. There was another question, if I could give an example of the force majeure outside of real estate. I answered it online, but very quickly. The first thing that came to my mind is a construction company that's doing residential renovation, and they were supposed to be done by April 30th, and they started, middle of February. Pandemic hit in middle of March, so that's where the contract is frustrated, and they can use that defense. Again, there's a lot to explain, but that very shortly answers that question. I do encourage whoever needs more information on it to go to my website, hushman.legal, and read the article. I explained it in more detail. I'm going to write another article, which I am writing actually, on few clauses that some of the brokers have seen that are adding to their the agreement of purchase and sale, and some of the benefit and a little bit of danger of having those clauses in. That will be I will be publishing that in a couple of days, so look out for that as well.
Sorry, what is your website again?
Hushman, HOOSHMAND.legal.
Legal?
Yes.
Legal.
There's another question for Rosa. This is from Maziar. He says, we have got a last minute assignment consent from Lantera in one day, which will be closed on Monday. Question to Rosa, what if the pre-construction buyer wants to differ his or her payment, which may be considered as breach of contract in normal times? Does the act of God have any assistance to the buyer to request for this delay?
Again, there is no case law precedent. So I can't answer that question and say this is what the law says, because we haven't had that. We haven't dealt with that. But Mazayar, if you would like to give me a call and we can chat about it more, because I need a little bit more background information on it before I can fully answer you. But to use the pandemic and the defense of, well, force majeure it's something that I don't know if it will work or not, because as I said, we don't have legal precedent.
Okay. Anonymous attendee is asking a good question, because some people might be wondering what happened to Jeff Levy, Winston Chan, and Winston Chan. And the answer is that there were some last minute emergencies that came up, and Doris and I were kind of scrambling, and we were able to find Rosa Hushman to join us at the last minute. So Rosa, we just want to thank you again for being with us. And of course, Gord as well. We really appreciate it. We're just—
I ask Rosa. Oops, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay,
no,
Rosa.
I was gonna say we're done. We have a few minutes still. Let's wrap it up at 12:30. We've got 6 minutes, so.
Okay, Rosa, I don't know if this is, so this, what I talked about earlier, the commercial rent relief, I don't think that's unfolded yet. They've given us a platform, some information about it, but the way I see it, when it does unfold, and again, the landlord has to agree to a reduction of rent of 25%. So when and if that happens, are they rewriting the lease, or are they just adding like a codicil to a will? Are they just adding a one pager to the current lease, replacing whatever clause it is for the rent with the new rent? And then have you researched this? Is this like forever? Is this for the term of the lease, or is this just a short period? Any comments on that?
I haven't researched it. I honestly, it's an interesting topic, but I haven't, that's on my list to research, but I
Okay.
haven't got to it.
Okay,
I
that's
would
fine.
love to get back to you on that
Yep.
by sending you an email, and
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
like further
Okay,
discussion on it.
because it really hasn't unfolded yet. I mean, this whole program is a partnership with the federal government and the provincial government, which as soon as you say that, you go, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
how is this
Mm-hmm.
going to end up? But anyway, okay, thanks.
No problem.
Did we answer Ida's question about instead of?
Yeah,
Yeah, we did that one,
I
right?
think, yeah, I believe so.
Okay, good.
What else do we got?
Is there anything we missed?
I'd just like to make a comment while you're looking through the
Sure, go
questions.
ahead.
I at the beginning, I discussed the various programs that the government has initiated. And there's two that are coming out of the woodwork that are very interesting that I didn't discuss, and that is they've basically gone to Export Development Canada, so the EDC, and they've gone to the Business Development Bank of Canada, and they've brought those entities in to give people some financial relief. And the reason I find that interesting because as far as I know, I'm going to research it more. It just came out that these entities, at least the EDC, will be guaranteeing unsecured lines of credits, which is of great interest to me because I'm a real advocate that I'm not saying you should leverage all the equity in your house, but to have access to a line of credit when and if it's deemed feasible to use has always been part of my business model. So certainly worth everybody. I'll probably do a little more report on that our next session. But in the meantime, everybody should, if you're interested in that type of financing, you should do some research on that because this is going to be pretty interesting if they guarantee unsecured loans. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Gerry. Doris, can you quickly give us one or two tips for listing your property in the COVID time? You wrote this book, How to Sell Your Home for More Money. That could probably come in handy now. What do we need to know?
Number one is you need to get a really good video done because people are really depending on the videos and what they can get out of the videos. Also, for the sake of appraisers and inspectors, it's also a good idea to do a video of inside, for example, furnaces, underneath the sinks, things that maybe sometimes some appraisers may not be able to go into and see, but it's easy if it's done on a video and good high quality pictures. Also make sure that, your place is very clean, decluttered, disinfected, and to have, either if you or your agent, to have like gloves, masks, hand sanitizer, and shoe covers at the entrance of the door. And just realize that this could be the new normal, which things are going to be done a little bit more virtual as well.
Okay, I want to thank you all. Gerry, we'll take another minute to talk about what's coming up in some future episodes, but I just want to take this opportunity to thank Doris and Susan Tuglia and Doris Pereno for bringing the idea and helping to organize the show. Rosa Hushman, thank you so much for joining at the last minute. Gord Somerville from HVI Appraisal, we appreciate it very much. He indicated in the comments there, he answered where their serving areas are. So Gord, thank you for that. And thanks everybody for joining today. Gerry,
Yes.
what's coming up? We talked about tax saving for high net worth people. You've been working on these IPPs, individual pension plans. So we're going to try and get that lined up for our next session in a couple weeks. Can you give us a little overview about that?
Yeah, so some will know this, some will not. We have what's called individual pension plans, IPPs. A lot of people don't utilize them, a lot of people don't know about them. So our next session, we're going to provide more information on individual pension plans, a good effective tool in certain situations, geared more toward high income earners. And where we use it a lot, certainly now with the new rules, the new tax rules, we've all watched Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau for the last 4 years implement all these crazy tax changes. And without getting into a deep dive into all that, one of the things that has happened that they did implement was a reduction. So let me just say it this way: a corporation gets a small business rate of 12.5%. And in a typical scenario, if we have a corporation that's doing well, we flow the excess money up to their holding company by way of a non-taxable dividend. So the money ends up in their holding company. The new rules now say if that holding company makes more than $50,000, then we lose the small business deduction in their operating company. So if you can follow that, the gist of it is we have these holding companies with lots of money in it, and it's causing a problem in utilizing our small business deduction. So we have to get the money out of that holding company. And there's 2 ways that we do that. One is with an insurance policy that's corporately owned and held. So that's one way. And the other is an individual pension plan. We can literally take the money out of a corporation. It's not taxable to the individual. We can put it into their very own pension plan. And now we've got it out of the corp, so the corp isn't making at least $50,000, which doesn't jeopardize our small business rate. So if you can follow all that, we're going to learn a little bit about IPPs. It's just not for those that have corporations and holding companies. It really applies to everybody. It certainly applies to more higher income earners, but we're going to do a little deeper dive. I've got a good contact that we're going to get on the show, and we're going to do a nice deep dive into that. It's it literally can be applicable to anybody, but it's worth knowing about because it's basically, I mean, I've always been pretty clear. I'm not a fan of RSPs for a whole bunch of reasons. If you give me 2 hours, David, I'll explain it all, but I know you're not going to. So I don't like RSPs, but certainly the individual pension plans is a good alternative to those type of structures. So I'll leave it at that for now, but lots more coming next session.
Okay, so that's amazing, Gerry. Thank you, as always, for co-hosting with me today and for all the work that you do. I'll just mention again, if you haven't, panelists, if you haven't already typed your contact information in the webinar chat area, please do so because people are asking for it. And if you do need it, please scroll through because most I've done that. I know, I think Doris and I think everybody's done that except maybe Gerry. So he's going to pop his info in there right now as well. Okay, so guys, again, thanks for your time. Enjoy the day. It looks like it's a beautiful day out there, a nice Sunday. Have a great day, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks,
Take care,
David.
guys.
Thanks, David. Thanks for all your efforts in this one. Thanks, everybody.